A male lion lay tangled in the wire at the edge of the reserve, his flank heaving with shallow breaths. The wire had twisted tight around one leg, cutting deep into flesh, each small movement sending a tremor of pain through his massive frame. The grass around him was pressed flat where he had thrashed earlier, but now he was still, sides rising and falling in a labored rhythm. His eyes flickered open, then closed again, too drained to roar, too weak to fight. The ranger, Daniel, slowed his steps when he first saw him. At a distance, the great mane looked as though it could have been only wind-blown grass, but the sound of ragged breathing made him stop. He raised the radio to his mouth, voice low, steady, reporting the exact location. Help would take time. Every minute mattered. The lion's paw twitched once against the soil, and the wire dug deeper. If he struggled more, he could bleed to death. If he stopped struggling altogether, his breathing might fail. Both paths were dangerous. Daniel took 2 careful steps closer, keeping his body low. The lion's eyes opened wide this time, golden and alert, flashing fear more than fury. His chest expanded sharply, a warning growl breaking through the dust. Daniel froze in place. If the lion tried to fight, the wire would only slice deeper. If he lunged, Daniel would not have the chance to move. The moment held still. The smell of blood lingered faintly in the warm air. Insects gathered at the edges of the wound. The wire, once a crude boundary fence, had turned into a trap no one had meant to set. Daniel felt the weight of it. Each cut line meant blood loss. Each breath meant another chance slipping. He spoke then, softly, more to steady the air than to reach the lion. "Stay still, boy," he whispered. "Help is coming." The words were carried off by the breeze, no different to the lion than the rustle of grass. But the tone mattered. Calm, even. The lion's eyes narrowed, not in peace, but in recognition that the figure before him was not advancing, not threatening. His paw shifted once, then went still again. Minutes stretched thin. Daniel knew the math in his head. How much blood a lion could lose. How quickly a trapped animal could collapse under its own stress. He repeated it to himself like a plain line of fact. If he fights the wire, he dies. If he lies too long, he dies. The radio crackled once in his hand, and Daniel spoke again, short and clipped this time. "Injured male, wire, bad cut, I need a med kit." Static answered. The team would come, but not yet. He watched the lion's chest rise, fall, pause too long, then rise again. Each breath was a stake in the balance. A breeze shifted the dry stalks around them, carrying with it the faint echo of other lions somewhere deeper in the reserve. The trapped male's ear twitched at the sound, his body straining to turn toward it, but the wire held fast. A sound rumbled low in his throat, not the full roar of dominance, but a muted call of distress. He wanted to answer, but his body had no strength left to do more than moan into the earth. Daniel shifted his weight slightly closer, watching every flicker of muscle. The lion tensed, but did not strike. His eyes closed again, head sinking to the ground. The wire glinted under the sun, cutting deeper as his legs sagged. Daniel pressed his lips together. Aware of the sharp truth, if he waited too long, no rescue team in the world would arrive in time. The field stayed quiet except for breathing. One human, one lion. Both waiting. Both locked in a fragile truce. Daniel's hand gripped the radio once more, voice steady, urgent without panic. "Hurry," he said. The lion's tail flicked once against the dust. His eyes opened, unblinking, fixed on the man who had not yet moved. The risk stayed heavy in the air. If Daniel stepped closer, he could be killed. If he stayed away, the lion could bleed out. Both truths stood equal in the fading light, and the moment stretched on, every breath counting down. Daniel stepped closer, the dust crunching lightly beneath his boots. The lion's body shifted at the sound, muscles tightening, and in a sudden burst of panic he thrashed once against the wire. The earth shook with the force, A growl ripped out from his throat, and blood welled darker along his leg where the metal cut deeper. Daniel froze instantly, voice low, steady, trying to push calm into the space between them. "Easy, easy now." The words were barely more than breath, but the tone mattered. The lion stilled again, chest rising and falling in hard rhythm, his eyes fixed wide with fear. Daniel did not advance yet. He let the silence settle, watching for the signs that the animal was choosing stillness again. The wire pulled cruelly around tendon and fur, and Daniel could see how one more fight against it might sever deeper vessels. If he struggled again, he could bleed to death before help even arrived. The radio crackled at his side, and he lifted it without taking his gaze from the lion. His words came clipped, calm, each syllable deliberate. "I'm with him. He's alive. Deep wire cut. Approach quietly." Static hissed back, followed by a faint reply. 5 minutes. Daniel nodded to himself, even though no one could see. 5 minutes was long in a place like this. Every movement, every second, carried the same truth. The animal's life was still balanced on a knife edge. Daniel lowered himself slightly, crouching so that his body was less imposing. He had done this before with antelope, even with smaller predators, but never with a full-grown lion at this range. His pulse ran fast, but his hands stayed steady at his sides. The lion's ears twitched, catching the sound of his voice as he spoke again, slow and even, words chosen not for meaning, but for their rhythm. "You're not alone. Help is here." The lion's breathing remained ragged. But he did not thrash this time. His tail flicked once, then lay flat. The earth around him carried the smell of iron and dust. Flies gathered at the wound, their buzzing sharp in the still air. Daniel's eyes followed the line of the wire, noting how tightly it had cinched, how little space there was between steel and bone. The sight told him what the risk was without question. If the lion lunged again, the cut would deepen past the point of saving. He placed one knee slowly on the ground, his body low, showing no sign of suddenness. From here he could hear the lion's breath clearer, like dry bellows dragging air in and pushing it out with effort. The lion's eyes blinked once, slow, not in trust, but in exhaustion. Daniel kept his own movements measured, breathing matched to the animal's rhythm. The space between them was tense, charged, yet delicate. In the distance, a bird called out, and the lion's ears turned toward the sound. His head lifted slightly, only to sag back to the ground. Strength was leaving him. Daniel knew what it meant. If he lost too much blood, no rescue, no vet, no team could bring him back. The plain truth pressed hard in Daniel's mind. If he struggles, he dies. If he collapses completely, he dies. Another crackle came from the radio. The team was closer now. Daniel answered briefly. "North fence line. Be ready." He shifted his stance slightly, letting his hands rest open, empty, in sight. The lion's eyes followed the motion, wary, but he did not move. A low, tired growl hummed from his chest, more warning than threat, but Daniel did not retreat. He spoke again, his tone like the steady beat of a drum, calm and unbroken. "Not long now. Just hold on." His words slipped into the dry air, joining the rustle of grass. The lion's eyes closed once more, his flank shuddering as he dragged another breath. Daniel watched, every second stretched thin, waiting for the team to appear, knowing the balance was so fragile that one wrong move could end the life before him. Daniel eased forward, one slow step at a time, until the rough wire cuts were plain before him. The metal bit deep into the lion's leg, slicing through skin and pulling tight against muscle. Blood seeped steadily, staining the earth beneath. The lion's flank rose and fell with strained effort, his breaths sharp and uneven. Daniel crouched, knees pressing into the dirt, the smell of blood strong now. The rescue team was still absent. He had minutes, maybe less, to make a choice. The lion's eyes flicked open at the movement, golden and sharp even in pain. A guttural rumble shook his chest, more instinct than strength. Daniel froze again, letting the sound pass, then lowered his head slightly, body language plain. He was not a threat. The lion's growl faded into silence, leaving only the rasp of his breathing. The choice weighed heavy, simple in truth but immense in consequence. If Daniel waited, the lion might bleed out before help arrived. If he acted now, he risked one sudden strike, a fatal charge at this distance. Both paths carried death. Daniel's hand moved slowly toward his belt, fingers brushing the worn handle of his knife. The blade was his only chance to cut the wire. His other hand stayed low, steady, palm facing outward as though to calm the air itself. The lion's ears twitched, catching the shift of sound, and for a moment his body stiffened. The wire dug deeper with that small motion, drawing a low groan from his throat. Daniel breathed out softly, words carried as steady as he could manage. "Stay. Don't fight it." His voice was low, calm, repeating the truth as much for himself as for the animal. He slid the knife free, the metal glinting briefly in the light. The lion's eyes caught it, narrowing, his body quivering with the thought of motion. Daniel stayed utterly still, blade held down, not yet raised. He had learned long ago that animals understood rhythm more than intent. His movements must remain slow, deliberate, predictable. He let the silence stretch, his breathing matched to the lion's heaving chest. The wire cut deep enough that blood loss was no longer the only danger. Infection would come. Sepsis swift in a body this size. Every second of delay narrowed the lion's chance of surviving, even if freed. Daniel knew the stakes in blunt terms. Wait, and the lion dies slowly. Act now, and one mistake could mean death for them both. The lion's eyes closed, only for a heartbeat, then opened again. His head remained flat on the ground, muscles quivering but not rising. It was a signal Daniel had to trust. The animal was too weak to strike now, too drained to resist. Still, even a single reflex could kill. Daniel edged forward on his knees until the sharp smell of iron and fur filled his lungs. The knife remained low, angled away until he was close enough to see every strand of wire, every dark edge of the wound. The lion's breath caught, chest shuddering as Daniel leaned in. Another low rumble shook the ground, weak but warning. Daniel's hand steadied against the earth. "Easy," he whispered, steady and even. He lifted the knife at last, the blade trembling not from fear, but from the knowledge of how precise he must be. One wrong angle could make the wound worse. One sudden flinch could end in claws and teeth. The air thickened, every sound magnified. The buzz of flies, the hiss of grass against the breeze, the dry rasp of the lion's lungs. Daniel pressed the blade to the first loop of wire. He paused once more, eyes meeting the lion's, waiting for stillness. The animal did not move, only stared back, pupils wide, chest rising hard. Daniel exhaled slowly, then pressed the knife against steel. The lion's growl rumbled deep in his chest, low and steady, but he did not strike. His body tensed, the muscles of his shoulder twitching against the ground. But his claws stayed sheathed. Daniel froze for a moment, letting the vibration pass through the earth beneath him, then spoke again in that same calm tone, steady as stone. "Easy now, hold still." His words were soft, barely more than air, yet the sound seemed to thread into the silence that hung between them. The lion's golden eyes never left him, fixed, unblinking, measuring each motion with the weight of instinct. Daniel lowered the knife carefully, pressing it against the first strand of wire. The blade cut slowly, grating against metal with a harsh scrape. The lion's ears flicked at the sound, a brief flinch in his shoulders, but he did not rise. Daniel leaned closer, his knees steady in the dirt, his breath kept even to match the lion's. The wire snapped free with a sharp crack. The lion jerked once. A sharp tremor of pain and surprise, but Daniel pulled back immediately, knife low, hands open to show no attack. The lion's growl deepened, his eyes blazing with warning, but he stayed on the ground. The wound oozed darker blood now where the pressure had been released, the smell sharp in the air. Daniel swallowed hard, eyes moving quickly over the injury. The wire had cut so deep that pieces of flesh had folded around it. He knew the truth of it without needing to say it aloud. If he did not cut every strand, infection would set in. If he hurried, the lion might strike. If he waited, the lion might not last the hour. He steadied the knife again, shifting closer, his voice carrying in that same steady rhythm. One more, just one more. The lion's ears twitched, his eyes following every slow movement. Daniel lowered the blade to the next coil, hands moving with the precision of ritual. Each scrape of metal echoed in the silence, louder than it should have been, loud enough to raise the tension higher with each sound. The lion's gaze remained fixed, unblinking, burning through Daniel's resolve. Another strand gave way with a sharp snap. The lion shuddered, his paw twitching against the dirt. He let out a moan, a sound not of rage but of exhaustion, his head sagging into the dust. Daniel did not stop speaking, his voice steady, even when the silence pressed in tight. "Almost free, stay with me." He shifted again, moving to the final knot of wire, the one twisted deepest into fur and flesh. This was the most dangerous moment. The lion's tolerance had limits, and the pain of this last cut could drive him to lash out. Daniel knew the risk plainly. If the animal lunged now, there would be no time to move. If he hesitated, the lion would lose more blood. There was no safe choice, only the right one. The blade slipped under the wire, slow as breath, careful not to dig deeper into the wound. The lion's body tensed again, a low growl rattling the air between them. Daniel whispered again, his voice low, unbroken. "Hold on, just one more." The lion's eyes stayed wide, pupils black against gold, following the knife, unblinking, unyielding. Daniel pressed down, the metal biting against metal, until at last the final strand snapped loose. The lion let out a roar, weak but raw, echoing across the plain. He collapsed fully onto his side, free leg stretching limp against the ground. His chest heaved, breath rough, but the wires were gone. Daniel pulled back quickly, the knife lowered, giving space. His knees shook now, though his hands had never faltered. The lion's gaze turned toward him once more, eyes heavy, unblinking. For a long moment, neither moved. Daniel remained still, his breath steady, his knife resting harmless against the earth. The lion blinked at last, slow and deliberate, before letting his head fall back against the soil. The silence that followed carried weight, filled with exhaustion, with fragile trust, and with the plain truth. The animal was free, but his survival was not yet certain. If he rose too fast, the wound could tear deeper. If he stayed too long, blood loss could take him. Every second is still balanced between life and death. Daniel exhaled slowly, his voice barely above the breeze. "You're free now." The words slipped into the grass, carried away, but the lion's unblinking eyes had already told him the truth. The rescue was not yet finished, but the first battle had been won. The final strand of wire fell away, and the lion collapsed heavily onto his side. Dust rose around him, curling in the air as his body shuddered. For a long breath there was only silence, broken by the harsh rasp of his lungs. Then, from deep within his chest, a roar broke free. It was not the steady call of dominance that usually rang across the savannah, but a fractured sound, raw with pain and relief. The roar rolled out over the plain, scattering birds into the air. Daniel stayed low, knife still in his hand but lowered, his body stilled by the force of the sound. The lion lifted his head once, mane darkened with sweat and dust, his mouth open wide as another roar tore loose. It echoed longer than the first, broken but insistent, a call that seemed to carry both survival and suffering in equal weight. Across the grassland, a second call rose in answer, then another, further still. Distant lions, their voices strong, answering his cry. The sound traveled in waves, spreading across the reserve like a chain of recognition. The trapped male had spoken at last, and his kin had heard. The air filled with a chorus, far-off roars folding into each other, each one deeper and fuller than his own. The response carried a truth Daniel could not deny. The pride knew he was alive, though they also knew he was wounded. The freed lion's body trembled as he tried to rise, legs struggling against the weakness that bled through him. He managed only to lift his shoulders, then sank again, breathing hard. A moan rumbling in his chest. Daniel's voice broke the silence again, soft, steady, as though his words might hold the moment together. Easy. Don't push. He knew what was at stake in plain terms. If the lion forced himself up too soon, he could tear the wound wider, bleed faster. If he stayed still and let strength return, he might hold on long enough for help. The distant calls rolled on, filling the sky with sound. The lion's ears twitched toward them, straining to rise again, his body drawn by instinct to rejoin his kind. Another roar rose from his throat, weaker than before but determined, as though he needed them to know he still fought. The effort sent a shiver down his frame, and his paw struck weakly against the dirt. Daniel clenched his jaw, watching carefully. Every twitch of muscle carried the edge of risk. Move too fast, and the fragile balance of survival would break. The breeze shifted, carrying the mingled scents of dust and blood across the plain. The grass swayed under its touch, bending as the sound of roars faded into echoes. The freed lion lay still again, sides heaving, the rise and fall of his chest ragged but steady. His eyes half closed, but he did not surrender them fully to sleep. He was waiting, perhaps listening, each breath another step along the narrow line between life and collapse. Daniel lifted his radio, pressing the button with a thumb that trembled despite his calm. He's free. He's down. Heavy blood loss. We need to move now. His voice, clipped and steady, was carried back in static. The team was near. Help was closer than before, but still minutes away. He looked once more at the lion, lying broken yet unyielding in the grass, and repeated the plain truth to himself as though to hold it in the air. If he rises too soon, he dies. If he waits, he might live. The lion's tail twitched once, dust lifting into the breeze. His gaze turned briefly toward Daniel, eyes glazed with exhaustion but still aware, then shifted back toward the sound of his distant pride. Another faint rumble slipped from his chest, almost swallowed by the wind. It was not a roar this time, but a soft echo, a last whisper of strength sent into the air. The plain grew quiet again, the roars fading into memory, leaving behind only the faint rustle of grass and the heavy sound of his breath. Daniel remained crouched, steady, his presence a silent anchor beside the wounded king who had called across the savannah and been answered. The sound still hung in the ranger's ears, not just pain, not just survival, but something in between. From the far edge of the grassland, movement stirred in the tall stalks. Daniel caught sight of dark shapes threading through the yellow blades, steady and deliberate. Within moments, the forms became clear. Lionesses, their heads low, their shoulders rolling with quiet strength. They stopped short of the clearing, eyes fixed on the male sprawled in the dust. Silence settled between them, thick and watchful. Not one of the females moved forward. They only waited, poised, as though measuring his strength from afar. The male stirred, ears pricking toward them, and a low groan rose from his chest. His body trembled as he gathered himself, front paws pushing against the earth. The attempt was slow, every motion shaking under the weight of blood loss. His leg, freed from the wire, buckled once beneath him, but he braced, tried again. Dust clung to his mane as he lifted his head high, jaws parting in a strained breath. The lionesses did not move to help. They did not rush forward. Their silence carried a truth that Daniel understood at once. If he could not stand, he would not be accepted back among them. Daniel's body shifted back, one slow step at a time, the knife already tucked away. His movements were careful, each one meant to show he was no longer part of this moment. His role was finished. The pride had arrived, and the male must take the next step on his own. The lion's flanks heaved with the effort, his eyes locked on the forms of his pride. Every second of struggle carried the same blunt stake. If he rose, he might rejoin them. If he fell again, his strength could break for good. With a deep, guttural breath, he heaved himself higher, pushing through the tremor in his legs. His frame wobbled, muscles quivering beneath the weight of his mane, but he found balance at last. For a moment he stood swaying, chest rising hard, his wounded leg barely able to hold. Dust and blood streaked down the fur, his eyes glassy with fatigue. Yet in that fragile posture, his head lifted toward the females waiting in the grass. A single lioness stepped forward, her body low, ears tilted, gaze fixed steady on him. She closed half the distance, then stopped, still watching, her tail flicking once against the tall grass. Another moved forward behind her, slower, her steps careful, deliberate. They circled slightly, keeping space, but their presence was no longer hidden. They had heard his cry across the plains, and now they had come to see if he could return. Daniel took another step back, boots brushing against the dry earth. His chest eased slightly as he put distance between himself and the reunion. He kept his body low, movements deliberate, never breaking the fragile quiet that had formed. His voice remained in his chest this time. There was nothing more to say. The male lion shifted, placing weight on his wounded leg. He grimaced in silence, a low moan leaking from his chest, but he did not collapse. Each step was shallow, weak, but forward. His body swayed with the effort, nearly folding before he caught himself again. The lionesses remained still, eyes sharp, watching without interference. They would not carry him, they would only meet him if he reached them. The plain truth pressed heavy into the moment. If he failed to hold himself upright, the pride might leave him behind. If he succeeded, they might accept him back, his wound forgiven by his will to endure. Daniel stopped moving now, far enough that his shadow no longer reached the animal. He stood silent, his breath even, his hands open at his sides. The lion's eyes did not return to him. They were fixed only on the pride waiting, on the possibility of return. Step by step, shaky and slow, he moved closer to the edge of the grassland. His pace faltered, his sides shuddering, but he did not fall. The lionesses waited, their bodies taut, the stillness carrying more weight than sound. Daniel's heart thudded against his ribs as he watched the fragile reunion unfold, knowing the stakes could not be clearer. Each step forward kept him alive. Each falter risked the end. The lion swayed on his feet, his mane heavy with dust, his breath coming in ragged bursts. His body seemed close to folding, but he steadied himself, head lifting against the weight of exhaustion. For a moment he turned, not toward the lionesses who waited at the edge of the grassland, but back toward Daniel. Their eyes met across the dry earth. The air tightened, sharp with the risk of what such a look might mean. This was still a predator in pain, still powerful even in weakness. Daniel held his breath, not daring to shift an inch. The lion's gaze lingered, golden eyes glinting under the fading light. His frame trembled, legs quivering, but he did not lower his head to charge. He did not bare his teeth. Instead, he blinked once, slow and deliberate, lids closing fully before lifting again. It was not submission, not gratitude, but a pause, a small gesture that carried weight only because it came in stillness, not violence. Daniel exhaled softly, his shoulders loosening though his hands remained steady at his sides. He knew what the truth was in that moment. If the lion had chosen rage, he would already be gone. If he chose stillness, it meant space to live. The lion swayed again, his paw dragging against the soil as he turned back toward the pride. His wounded leg quivered under his body, but he placed it forward, step by step. Blood streaked the fur, dark and clotted in places, but he did not collapse. The lionesses at the edge of the grassland remained statues, their eyes locked on him, their tails flicking with tension. They did not move closer, not until he proved his strength. The male limped toward them, slow, uneven, but forward all the same. Daniel shifted his weight backward, putting a little more distance between himself and the unfolding moment. He understood that his role had ended. The lion had turned once to see him, had measured the man who cut him free, and then had chosen to walk away. It was all the answer Daniel needed. He stepped back carefully, boots quiet on the brittle soil, his body open, showing no threat. The lion did not look back again. The wounded male reached the first lioness, who stepped forward to meet him. Her nose touched briefly to his shoulder, the gesture firm, searching. Another lioness circled to his other side, her body brushing against his flank. Their inspection was silent, a wordless measure of his state. He stood, wavering but upright, breathing hard but unbroken. For pride, this was all that mattered. Behind them, the sun leaned lower, painting the savanna in muted gold. The grass rippled under the wind, bending in waves that carried dust into the air. Daniel remained still at a distance, his eyes following as the lionesses gathered around the male. The scene unfolded with quiet precision. One by one, the females pressed close, forming a half-circle of presence around him. They were not offering comfort. They were offering recognition, acknowledgement that he still belonged. The lion let out a low sound, not a full roar, but a drawn breath of effort. His body leaned briefly against the lioness nearest him, then straightened again. The limp remained, sharp and uneven, but each step he took seemed to anchor him deeper among them. They accepted his presence by proximity alone. Daniel felt the moment carry its truth plainly. The lion had chosen not to strike, had chosen instead to walk away. The pride had chosen to wait and then to meet him. All of it balanced on fragile choices. Any shift could have meant violence, rejection, or death. Instead, the scene resolved in silence, each creature turning back toward the vast plain ahead. The male lion lifted his head once more, mane brushing against the wind, before limping further into the tall grass. The lionesses parted slightly, making space for him to pass among them. They did not look back at Daniel, nor did the male again. Their focus had shifted fully to one another, to survival, to the endless rhythm of life on the savanna. Daniel stood alone, the distance widening with each limping step of the lion, with each ripple of grass between them. The slow blink replayed in his mind, simple yet profound. A gesture he would never name as thanks, but would never forget. The truth of it was clear. He had given the lion a chance, and the lion had chosen to live. The lionesses closed the distance at last, their bodies pressing lightly against the injured male. One brushed her flank along his shoulder, another lowered her head to his mane, a silent gesture of belonging. The wounded lion swayed under the touch but did not fall. He stood within their circle, blood darkening his leg, yet his posture lifted slightly as though their nearness gave him balance. No sound came from the pride. Their reunion was measured in silence and touch, in the quiet confirmation that he was not alone. Daniel watched from his place at the edge of the clearing, his breath caught in his chest. His hands, still stained with dust and the memory of steel, hung useless at his sides. He had no part in what unfolded now. This was theirs. The sight of the females brushing against the male, one after another, settled in him with a weight that pushed tears into his eyes. He blinked them back, though they fell anyway, carving thin paths down his dirt-lined face. The lion shifted his weight, leaning briefly against the nearest lioness before straightening again. His limp was clear, his strength incomplete, but the pride did not waver. They stayed pressed close, a wall of silent guardianship around him. Their tails flicked in unison, their steps slow, patient. He was weakened, but he was still theirs. Daniel knew what the truth was, spoken in plain words only he could hear. If they had rejected him, he would have been left behind to die alone. If they had refused his presence, no human hand could have given him enough strength to follow. But they had accepted him, brushing fur to mane, standing still until he found his footing again. That choice might save him more than any knife, any cut of wire. The wind moved across the savanna, bending the tall grass in rolling waves. It carried with it the sharp scent of blood, the heavier musk of lions, and the faint memory of wire left coiled useless in the dirt. Daniel stood with his shoulders heavy, the ache of adrenaline fading, leaving only the fragile clarity of what he had seen. He whispered once, to no one in particular, "Go on, then." His words were carried away, lost in the wide air. The lions began to move as one, slow at first, the females pacing carefully to match the males' uneven steps. They formed a loose arc around him, guiding him forward without pressure, never straying far. He limped with determination, each step small but certain, his head lifted to the horizon. The pride flowed with him into the grass, their bodies vanishing slowly into the swaying gold. Daniel stayed rooted to the ground until the last tail flickered out of sight. Only the rhythm of grass remained, waving in silence where the lions had passed. The quiet pressed deep into him, heavier than any sound. His eyes still burned, tears gathering again despite himself. He let them fall, knowing he might never stand so close to such a moment again. Not just survival, but the raw grace of acceptance, of kinship stronger than pain. The wind whispered over the plain, cool against his skin, drying the wet tracks on his face. Daniel lowered his head at last, shoulders sinking, and turned away from the place where the lions had disappeared. Behind him, the grass closed in on itself, as if the earth had swallowed the moment whole. Ahead, the savanna stretched wide and endless, carrying the memory forward in silence,